Community-based corrections. Introduction. Community-based corrections include a variety of criminal penalties that either reduce or eliminate time in prison or ease the transition from prison to freedom. This study session will expose you to different forms of community-based corrections such as fines, restitution, probation, and parole. Learning outcomes. After you have studied this study session, you should be able to describe at least 3 forms of community-based correction. Forms of community-based corrections. 1. Fine. Fines have been part of the criminal sanctioning process for centuries. It is often thought of as a community-based penalty. Under early laws, monetary payments in the form of damages or compensation were made directly to crime victims, which are fines. In recent years, the use of fines for more serious crime has been increased, mainly as a result of prison overcrowding and heavy probation caseloads. In spite of this usefulness, American judges have generally been reluctant to use fines as the penalty for felony crimes. This is so because they see a fine as too lenient for many common crimes. This situation is reversed in many other countries where fines are the preferred penalty for offenses. Tonry, 1996. 2. Restitution. Restitution and community services are old ideas. Restitution and community services are sometimes imposed along with other sanctions such as jail time and fines. For instance, some countries place these 2 punishments at the more lenient end of immediate sanctions and reserve them for petty criminals, drunk drivers, and some white-collar offenders. The spread of restitution as a community-based alternative or supplement to incarceration did not reflect any fundamental change in corrections philosophy, which retained its emphasis on the offender. 3 different methods of establishing the nature and amount of restitution are now used as follows. Klein, 1997. 1. The court determines restitution after hearing from the prosecution and defense, a probation official, the victim, and the offender. 2. The victim is required to file what amounts to a restitution claim with the court, and in fixing the offender's payment, the court may consider any insurance the victim might have. This method is generally regarded as the least satisfactory. 3. The restitution is established through face-to-face meetings of offender and victims who work out a mutually acceptable agreement. 3. Probation. Probation is an alternative to jail or prison that allows offenders to remain in the community under court supervision. That is, this is a true alternative to imprisonment and has become the mainstay of community-based corrections. For instance, instead of going to jail or prison, offenders sentenced to probation are allowed to remain in the community under supervision of authorized agents of the court. Probation supervision involves two aspects: surveillance of probationers and access to services in the community. Surveillance means little more than a periodic check-in by the probationers, or it involves much closer monitoring. There are various models of probation supervision. A casework model is an example of this, in which the probation officers establish one-to-one relationship with their clients and provide counseling and treatment services directly. In this respect, the probation officer is viewed as a primary change agent, helping offenders deal with every problem and guiding them in the modification of their behavior. 4. Parole. Parole is the supervised release of inmates prior to the full completion of their prison term. That is, prisoners who meet parole board criteria for release may be released long before their prison sentence expires. For example, an offender with a sentence of 5 to 10 years might earn more than a year of good time credit and be eligible for parole in just over 3 years. Unfortunately, one of the criticisms of parole boards observed by Allen and Simonson 1995 is that the process for selecting inmates for parole is highly objective, and prisoners often do not know what standards will be applied in their case. However, prisoners are released from prison under parole subject to conditions that include no further criminal violations and adherence to the rule laid down by parole officials. For instance, they sign an agreement to that effect. In practice, this means following the instructions of a parole officer. Parole officers have difficult tasks made worse by the fact that they must be cops and social workers at the same time. Their cop duties include restricting parolees' activities, detecting violations, making arrests, and initiating proceedings that may lead to revocation of parole. Their social work duties include providing counsel and support to parolees and otherwise assisting them in the difficult adjustment back to the community. Study session summary. In this study session, we described community-based penalties such as fines, restitution, probation, and parole. These are also known as community-based corrections. A criminal sentence specifies the penalty to be paid by the offender, whether prison, a fine, probation, or an intermediate sanction such as retribution. The justification of punishment is retribution, which involves making the guilty person pay a penalty proportional to the seriousness of the offense or prevention of crime. That ends study session 4. Thank you for listening.